Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our National SOAR online course review session for the adult curriculum. If you have completed the SOAR online course for adults, then this is the follow-up to that, where we from the TA Center go over some of the most important concepts and review the SOAR model as you transition into providing services. My name is Amanda Starkey, and I'm joined by Dan and Dazira from the Technical Assistance Center. A quick disclaimer before we start the call. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. A few instructions before we get started. So first of all, this is a national review session where we will be going over the national standard SOAR process. It does not replace any state-specific training that may be required for SOAR certification in your states. And we can't address case-specific questions. We're just going to be reviewing the standard SOAR process and how to use the model in this review session. If you have any state-specific questions or you want to talk through a specific application, please reach out to your SOAR state team lead or the SAMHSA SOAR TA Center liaison in your state. A recording of this will be posted on our website within about a week, and you can go to samhsa.gov/events. It is a listen-only call. That means all participant lines will be muted for the whole call and the chat feature will be disabled. However, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit questions, and we will answer them as they come in or reach out if we need more one-on-one support. At the end of this session, you'll have an opportunity to take a short online quiz and download a certificate of completion that you can use for personal use. This doesn't come with continuing education credits, but if you want to show that you have attended and completed this follow-up training, you can download that certificate of completion. For accessibility and interpretation, we have ASL interpretation, live captioning, and live Spanish interpretation services on this call. To show captions, you can click on the CC icon. So you'll find this if you click on more at the bottom of your screen. You will have the option for closed captioning, or you can select the interpretation icon and choose Spanish audio to listen to our call in Spanish. Here is a map of your TA Center liaisons. So we are color coded. I am all of the states in yellow. Dazira is the red states, and Dan is the blue states. So you can just look at your state to find out who your TA Center liaison is. You can also look at the SOAR state directory on the SOARworks website and click on your state, and you'll find contact information for your state team lead and your TA Center liaison, along with local leads in your state. Let's review the agenda for today. We're going to start with just an introduction to SOAR and a quick review of the SOAR process. We're going to talk about the basics, so identifying and engaging SOAR applicants, getting started and working through those SSA forms that are required with all disability applications. We'll have an in-depth review of SSA's listing of impairments, and then we'll do a refresher on the SOAR medical summary report, which you all know is kind of the cornerstone of a SOAR-assisted application. And we'll end the call with next steps as you move past the training phase and move into beginning the work. Included in this review session, we will have the PowerPoint slides available to print out. And on the SOARworks website, you will find all SSA forms that will be discussed on today's call, along with all of the SOAR tools and worksheets needed to complete a SOAR-assisted application. There's also the MSR interview guide and template that will help you write your medical summary reports. There are sample medical summary reports, and we really encourage you to read through those because they give ideas of the wording style and also some things to think about based on the different types of diagnoses you may be working with when you're submitting applications. We also have a sample application packet. We encourage you to review your state's SOAR process and training requirements. Some states, while most of the country follows the model we will be presenting today, some states have specific guidance that they want you to follow when you're submitting applications in your state. So be sure to familiarize yourself with your state SOAR process. All right, let's get into things with the basics, and I'm going to turn things over to Desiree.
Thank you so much, Amanda. All right, let's start off with the basics. So, um, this is mm, this is just a comparison of both of the programs. As you should already know, there are two disability programs that are administered by the Social Security Administration. SSI, or Supplemental Security Income, and you also have SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance. Both of these disability programs come with both health insurance. For SSI, it's important to remember that the health insurance that's associated with that program is Medicaid. And for SSDI, the health insurance is Medicare. For SSI, the eligibility is based on needs. So it's a needs-based program. So all the resources and income for that household are considered. They look at income and resources and also living arrangements. The monthly federal benefit rate for SSI for 2025 is $967. The eligibility is based on your insured status or the contributions you've made through your work pay into the FICA system. And so the monthly amount is based on the earnings based on your work history. And it comes with a date of eligibility. As with SSI, it comes with a protective filing date. And the protective filing date for SSI is really, really important to remember. And it really activates the point in which payments can start. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to establish that protective filing date. So the key points to remember for this slide is that both disability insurances both disability programs come with insurance. For SSI, it comes with Medicaid. The way that you can remember that is that you think about the aid, and also should trigger your memory to remind you that SSI is a needs-based program. For SSDI, the eligibility is based on your work history, and it comes with Medicare. So the definition of disability for adults is the inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity, which has a monetary amount of $1,620 for 2025. And so with that inability to engage in substantial gainful activity, it has to be by reason of a medically determinable physical or mental health impairment, which can be expected or result in death, or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of 12 months, nothing less than 12 months. So with that definition, it's important to recognize that there has diagnosis, the documentation that really lets us know that there has been some impairment in that person's ability to function. And there has to be a duration of the amount of time that that ailment should be present. So 12 months or more, or is something that could likely result in death. And again, all those conditions and all those medical requirements have to impede someone's ability to function so severely that they are unable to work at SGA. This is the Social Security sequential evaluation for adults. And this is the step-by-step process in which Social Security reviews applications and determines their eligibility for payment, or if they're awarded disability or not. And so it starts off at the Social Security office in step 1 and also ends at step 5 at the Social Security office when they announce the decision. So in step 1, the question that's asked is the person working at SGA? Now, if that's the first question, it should give you a hint that people can work and still apply for benefits. But at this step, they're looking at if the person is working and if they're working at SGA. And so if the answer is no, they're not working at SGA, it progresses to step 2. Does the person have a severe impairment? And if the answer there is yes, the next step is step 3. Does the impairment meet or equal a listing? And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the listings later on this afternoon. But basically, the listings are just your roadmap to understanding what is required to meet that disabling condition so that Social Security or DDS can make a decision to make an allowance at that point. So we really encourage that step 3 is the key to SOAR, right? The key to SOAR. If we have a person that may or may not be working at SGA that has a severe impairment that meets the listing, then that's what we want. That's the first opportunity to get an approval if all of those things are met. And if they're not, then Social Security uses 2 other steps to make the evaluation. The first is step 4, does the impairment allow for past relevant work? Can the person do what they used to do? If the answer there is yes, they can, then it will be denied. But if it's determined that they cannot do what they used to do, the next question is, does the impairment allow for any other work? And that any other work means any work in the national economy. It doesn't mean that the job has to be hiring or something that's even close to where the applicant lives. If there is any opportunity to say that this individual could work in 3 different places, then that's what Social Security will put down. And if they find those 3 places, then that person will be denied. So the basis for all of this is to give you a visual that there's only 2 opportunities for Social Security to approve someone, and that's at step 3 and that's step 5. And we really, really encourage that all of the critical components for the SOAR model are met so that we can get that earliest decision at step 5 by illustrating that the person meets the listing. All right, so I've said it a couple of times, but step 3 is key. A person can be found disabled at step 3 and begin receiving their benefits as long as we have adequate evidence that really illustrates that the person meets or equals the listing and that the applicant is unable to work at SGA. Connecting that functional information to illustrate their limitations and their inability to maintain work at SGA is super important, and using appropriate medical documentation to illustrate all of that is key. The SOAR model uses a really broad definition of homelessness. So SOAR is intended to assist individuals that are at risk or experiencing homelessness to navigate the Social Security process. And so we use the HEARTH Act and SOAR and really have a really broad sense of what homeless and at risk of homelessness means. And that's important to note because it's really different from the Social Security's definition of homelessness. So for Social Security, a claimant is homeless if he or she does not or imminently will not have a fixed or regular or adequate nighttime residence. And some examples include shelters outside, or living in abandoned buildings or cars, or temporarily with friends or relatives, often known as doubling up. And then applicants will receive an expedited processing at Social Security, at SSA, through the use of what they have called a homeless flag on their electronic application. So understanding those differences in the definitions of homelessness is really important to remember, because there are SOAR applications that we will do because that person is at risk of homelessness that don't necessarily meet the definition of homelessness for Social Security. And what that means is they may be received as a SOAR application at the Social Security field office, but they won't necessarily have the homeless flag. An example of that would be someone that's incarcerated. Individuals that are assisting with applications for people that are in institutional settings will not get the homeless flag according to Social Security, but will be considered at risk for the purpose of using the SOAR model for us. So we'll capture those outcomes and we'll include it in our data, but it's not necessarily something that Social Security will flag as homeless because their living situation do not fit in Social Security's definition. Identifying applicants for SOAR assistance. It's really important to familiarize yourself with the criteria that Social Security has to deem someone disabled. So looking at that definition of homelessness is the first kind of way to identify who should be assisted through SOAR. And so once you've identified an individual may meet the definition of disability, it just makes sense to use the SOAR model to assist them. We do not want to discourage anyone from applying for SSI or SSDI benefits. So if they don't necessarily meet the criteria for the definition of disability according to Social Security, we don't want to discourage them from applying because they have the right to do so anyway. But plan for alternative services or referrals. So that doesn't mean that you have to do SOAR, the whole entire SOAR model with them, but there should be a plan in place to offer them for assistance or even a referral. And consider adding your program acceptance criteria to whatever marketing material that you have. Oftentimes, for some agencies, they are not allowed to accept SOAR referrals outside of the folks that they have in their programs. So make that clear and understood to the general public so that you can alleviate any confusion or even disappointment if someone shows up when they didn't know that they were not eligible. We encourage you also to incorporate any DEI considerations into your work, and we'll speak a little bit more about that in order to broaden the net for those that could be assisted through SOAR. We want to be able to make sure that SOAR assistance is as equitable as we can possibly get it. We encourage you to review the identifying SOAR applicants and sample SOAR referral tool that we have available on our website. Identifying applicants, DEI considerations continued. The overarching questions for consideration are included on this wonderful resource. The information to consider that may be linked to the individual's racial or ethnic or cultural identity is important to consider while you're interviewing and later on while you are writing their medical summary report. So this is just a resource that we have available to you on our website as well. It's chock full of great examples and information we encourage you to review. And the SOAR eligibility decision tree is also another resource that's available. It just walks you through how to decide who or if a SOAR provider should complete a SOAR-assisted application for someone. So on the right side of this resource are all the critical components that are needed to assist an individual through the SOAR process. And the kind of decision tree is on the left and in the center of the page. It starts off by just asking, is the individual experiencing or at risk of homelessness? And if the answer is yes, and if the answer is no, it will direct you on what to do first. And that's a really good resource to keep by your workstation. If you have any questions about that, we also encourage you to reach out to your SOAR TA Center liaison. But before we move off of this slide, I think it's a great opportunity to remind you of those critical components of serving as the applicant's representative, making sure that we sign that 1699 and that 1696 in order to serve as that representative. We encourage also that collecting medical records, collecting, reviewing, and submitting them with your SOAR packet is part of the critical components of SOAR, and writing that and submitting the medical summary report using all of the information that you've gained through your interactions and interviews with the applicant and from your review of medical records and interviews with collateral sources that may have additional information that could be helpful for the applicant. And then number 4, obtaining a co-signature for that MSR that could be signed by an acceptable medical source, and completing a quality review that is established by either your agency or locality or your state SOAR, SOAR leads. None of this work or none of the expectations of using critical components or tracking your outcomes or completing a SOAR application be worth talking about if we didn't touch on how, the importance of engaging with applicants. It's really important, right? Because we are expecting applications to be full of information about the individual's history. So we're expecting folks to just tell us, all of their business, right? We want to be able to represent their story in a way that's respectful and illustrate that can illustrate through what we write the limitations that the person experiences. In order to do that, we have to have really strong engagement skills. So creating and maintaining a safe space for not only the applicant, for you as well. We always want to encourage that you under-promise, but simply over-deliver, and keep those promises. And, oftentimes for the folks that we work with, they have had experiences where people have said numerous times that they would be there to help and just haven't. Or the applicant that we're serving has had to tell their story more than once, over and over again. And so it's uncomfortable. And so being able to provide that safe space for them where you are keeping your promises and want to encourage the applicant to come back to continue the application is really key. Finding out where that person spends their time is super helpful in case they missed an appointment. It's really hard to navigate, the experience of homelessness with all the requirements that are needed to complete an application. So finding out where they're spending their day in case schedules get, conflicted is really, really important so that you can find them and develop ways to maintain that contact, including identifying someone to contact should you need to reach out to the applicant. Where do they spend their time? Who are they spending their time with? Do you have a contact number for the person, for any collateral source, family member, friend, other case manager that will be able to help assist you with locating them or the applicant if you should lose contact? As you're interviewing, it's important to ask open-ended questions. If you ask closed-ended questions, you're going to get a one-word response. If you ask open-ended questions, you'll get response and information where you may not even have to ask additional questions after that. Be mindful of any nonverbal communication. People can articulate without words how they're doing and how they're feeling non-verbally. So paying attention to that non-verbal communication, understanding that the shift in body language could mean that there needs to be a shorter session sometimes, right? And so we really want to be mindful of that non-verbal communication. And again, using respectful and understanding language and how we depict their stories and what we write and how we respond to them. Understanding of those cultural differences is really important in the work that we do. We have tons of information about engagement on DEI that's available to you on our SOAR website. And if you have any questions about any of that, we really encourage you to reach out to anyone here at the SOAR TA Center. So now we're moving into getting started, and I think I pass it on to Dan. Dan?
All right. Thank you, Desiree. And thank you all for being here today with us for the review session. So Dasara just spoke to the basics of the two Social Security Administration disability benefit programs, SSI and SSDI, kind of a high-level overview of SOAR, definitions of homelessness, and engaging applicants. Now we're going to transition to actually getting started with an application. We'll start with talking about some kind of pre-application prep work. It's very helpful to kind of get organized with your files for each of the applications that you're going to assist with before even meeting with the applicant. So preparing a file for the applicant with all the different forms that you're going to need to help them complete. So that would include intake forms. You may have a specific intake form for your agency. You may have the sample SOAR referral form in there that you received from either someone internally at your agency or from an outside agency, depending on where you take referrals from as a SOAR provider. It's helpful to have blank copies of all of the SSA forms that you're going to help the applicant to complete. Some of the SOAR tools that we have on our website to help you with completing your applications. And I'm actually going to put a link in the chat for everyone to check out. This is a page on our website, the tools and worksheets page. And I actually highly recommend kind of bookmarking this page because there's a lot of really helpful resources for you when you're getting started with your first application and for subsequent applications as well. It's also helpful to include a contact list for any established Social Security representatives at the local field offices that you'll be submitting applications to your state's Disability Determination Services office, if there are any contacts that are established there. Um, you might not have a list of local medical providers quite yet, but as you get started with helping the applicants that you're serving with these applications, you'll likely find that a lot of them may see similar providers. There may be a community-based mental health program where they get their psychiatric care from, or several clients may have visited the same hospital if they needed emergency care for mental health conditions or other physical health conditions. So starting to kind of maintain a list of the local medical providers and also information about their records department, because we're going to get into it, but a big part of using the SOAR model to assist with SSI and SSDI applications is helping the applicant to collect their medical records that you'll then send along to DDS to help support their disability claims. So in each file, and these files can be paper files, they can be electronic files, it might be a combination of both. We do encourage you to set up separate sections for each kind of different type of documentation. So you might have a section for the Social Security forms that you help the person to complete, a separate section for the medical records that you help the person to collect, maybe a separate section for letters that your client or you as their representative receive from Social Security and DDS. Just having these separate sections helps to organize your effort and to be easily able to find these different documents when you need them throughout the process. Okay, so if you haven't checked out this guide on our website, I definitely recommend checking it out. We call it our standard SOAR process, or steps to completing an SSI, SSDI application using the SOAR model. This does go back to what Amanda said in the beginning of today's call. This is kind of our general standard SOAR process that we developed to be kind of used and potentially adopted for states and localities. So it's the process for submitting an SSI and SSDI application using the SOAR model may look a little bit different in your state or in your even in just in your locality with the specific Social Security field office that you're kind of doing business with or submitting applications to. So if you're very newly trained and you haven't started on your first application yet, before even starting, I would recommend reaching out to your SOAR TA Center liaison or your state team lead just to confirm if there is kind of a specific process for submitting SSI and SSDI applications, either in your state or in your locality. Because if there is, and you submit it a different way, it could cause delays, and just kind of cause you some, um, roadblocks for both you as the representative, but also for the person that you're helping with the application. But definitely this resource is a good one to review, for a step-by-step explanation of how to process an application using the SOAR model. Okay, so the SOAR model, especially in the beginning, is an intensive process between you and the applicant that you're assisting. A lot of the work is done kind of in the beginning, before you actually submit the application to Social Security. And so we do recommend, when possible, to try to set up some regular and recurring meetings with the person that you're assisting with the SSI and SSDI application. Once a week is usually good in the beginning. If you're able to meet with the person in person, that's always very helpful, but sometimes you might be able to do phone call visits. Obviously when you're needing to secure signatures on release forms and Social Security forms, you're going to have to meet the person in person. And then, the length of time of engagement will really depend on the applicant, how long they're able to sit with you for interviews and to complete Social Security forms, et cetera. So you might kind of have to spread out the visits over the course of several days if the person has trouble sitting for long periods of time. We do recommend using our MSR interview guide, to help guide your discussion during your meetings with the applicants that you're assisting. This interview guide is on that tools and worksheets page that I put a link to in the chat. After you meet with the applicant, especially if you're interviewing them for information that you want to include in the medical summary report, we encourage you to kind of add the pertinent details into the medical summary report after each meeting. So the task of completing the medical summary report doesn't seem as daunting if you're kind of slowly putting information in there after each meeting with the applicant. Okay, so before starting an application, a really important thing to find out is if the person that you're going to be helping with an application has a pending SSI and or SSDI application at Social Security. So the person may be able to tell you this. They may be sure that they haven't applied for SSI or SSDI in the past, or maybe they applied several years ago and got denied. So their application, that application wouldn't be able to be continued. They have to start a brand new application. But some folks are unsure if they've applied or if they have anything pending, or maybe they can't remember. And so a couple things you can do to find out if a person has a pending SSI or SSDI application. One of them is to complete this form with them, the SSA 3288 form, and you can send this to your local Social Security office. You just want to make sure that you're very specific on this form about what information you're requesting. So if you're trying to find out if the person has a pending application, disability application, you would just want to write that specifically on this form. You don't want to check every single box on here. You have to be very specific or Social Security may reject the form. One thing that we have heard from SOAR providers in the field is that these SSA 3288 forms do sometimes take a low processing priority at Social Security offices. A lot of the Social Security offices are very inundated with processing new disability claims. And so the turnaround time for them processing one of these 3288 forms might be a little bit slower. So if you're trying to find out if someone has a pending SSI or SSDI claim and you want to get a quick answer, it might be best to actually just sit with your applicant and call Social Security to find out. You might be on hold a little bit with Social Security if you take this route, but it will end up being quicker than submitting the 3288 in most cases. So you can choose either option, but you're likely to find out quicker if you just call Social Security, but the applicant would have to be with you, because you're not formally their representative yet, so you can't call Social Security to find out that information. unless the applicant's on the phone with you and they authorize you to speak with Social Security on their behalf. Okay, so let's say you have either sent in the 3288 form and you found out that the person doesn't have a pending SSI or SSDI claim, or you've called your local Social Security office or even the Social Security 800 number, and you found out that they don't have a pending SSI or SSDI application, and you want to move forward with helping this person with a disability claim or application using the SOAR model. Generally speaking, one of the first things that you're going to do with the applicant is to help them set their protective filing date. So the protective filing date, otherwise known as PFD, is the date that the applicant or their representative first contacts Social Security and indicates that they have an intent to file an SSI disability application or an SSDI application. And in some cases, especially for for SSI applications, this date is used to determine when the individual can begin receiving benefits. So, for example, if you set someone's protective filing date today in December of 2024, you eventually help them submit their complete application. It took Social Security, say, 4 months to make a decision. If the person got approved for SSI, they would get paid back to their original protective filing date. So they would get about 4 months of retroactive benefits. And so that's why the protective filing date is an important date and an important step in the process. So there's a couple different ways that you can set a person's protective filing date. I do just want to underscore that we always recommend using the third option here on this slide. So you can walk into Social Security without an appointment, although Social Security has recently moved to an appointment-based system. So walking into Social Security with the applicant is not really advised anymore. You could also call Social Security to set someone's protective filing date. But generally, if you're calling Social Security to set a protective filing date, they'll probably set your applicant up with an appointment to apply for SSI and SSDI with the help of a Social Security representative. And as a SOAR provider, you kind of want to avoid that because you're kind of playing that role essentially. You're helping the person to complete all of the required Social Security forms comprised in an SSI and SSDI application, and you're submitting it on the person's behalf to Social Security, as opposed to Social Security taking the application for the applicant. So that's why I said we strongly recommend the easiest, most convenient way for both you and the client that you're helping or the applicant that you're helping is to help the person set their protective filing date by initiating that person's online disability benefit application on Social Security's website. And I'm going to kind of go through the step-by-step process of how to help someone set their protective filing date online by starting or initiating that online disability application. But I just want to say one more time, the easiest and best way to set the protective filing date is to do it online by initiating the online disability benefit application. Okay, so before starting the online disability benefit application with your applicant, it's best practice to try to help them set up a My Social Security account. And I'll just say right away that setting up one of these accounts can be difficult for folks experiencing homelessness or for folks with memory impairments or who don't have identifying documents, maybe because of episodes of homelessness. So you might not be able to set up a My Social Security account with your applicant, but we do recommend trying because it does come with some benefits if they have the My Social Security account. And we have created a kind of a flow chart for helping the applicants that you are assisting with setting up a My Social Security account. So that can be, you can check that out, the flow chart, and then you can also just kind of navigate to Social Security's website to find the link to where to help someone set up a My Social Security account. You can't set up the My Social Security account on behalf of the applicant, though. They have to be with you when you're setting it up. Okay, so let's assume I'm going to go through two different scenarios of helping someone to set their protective filing date by initiating their online disability application. The first scenario is that you were able to successfully help them with setting up a My Social Security account. The second scenario is that you were not able to help them set up a My Social Security account. So this is the first scenario. So say you helped your client to set up their My Social Security account, and now you're getting ready to help them set their protective filing date online. So you would navigate to Social Security's website to where you would apply for disability benefits. We have the link on this slide. And the slides, I believe the slides will be emailed to everyone directly. Okay, I'm sorry. The slides will actually not. I was wrong. I responded to someone's question wrong in the chat, so I'm sorry for that. The slides won't be emailed to you, but they will be available on our website along with the recording. So anyways, we have the lot. You can just kind of Google apply for Social Security disability benefits anyways, but these slides will be available to everyone on our website after today's call. So navigate to the Social Security website for applying for disability benefits. You'll click Start a New Application. Then you'll answer some very basic preliminary questions that verify the applicant's identity, like their name, date of birth, social security number, address, etc. So just kind of the basic information. Then it'll give you it'll give you two options. And if you were able to successfully help them to create a My Social Security account, you would select I am applying for myself. Then you would help the person log into their My Social Security account. And then as soon as you get to the part of the online application where they give you a reentry number, you want to stop and exit after completing, the basic preliminary questions. Stop when you get to the reentry number page. You can save and exit, but you first want to make sure to write down the reentry number because you'll need that when you go back into the application to complete it in its entirety. So I just want to repeat that one more time. Make sure to write down the reentry number and save it somewhere safe. You can also print the reentry number page for your records. But if you lose the reentry number, Social Security is unable to provide you with this, so you won't be able to get back into the application. So it's important to write that down and save it somewhere safe. These couple slides just provide some guidance in terms of creating a My Social Security account or helping your applicant to create a My Social Security account. They will need to go through kind of an identity verification process. Social Security uses login.gov or ID.me. Those are the two options for kind of identity verification. And again, this can be quite difficult for folks experiencing homelessness or who lack, proper identification or other documents that would be needed in order to create one of these accounts. So it is okay if the applicant you're assisting can't create one of these accounts, but you do want to try to help them because it makes the process a little bit smoother for both them and for you as their representative. Okay, so this is scenario number 2, and it's pretty similar to scenario number 1, but the scenario number 2 is the person was not able to create a My Social Security account for whatever reason. So you would still navigate to the same page on Social Security's website where you can initiate an online disability benefit application. You would still click Start a New Application with the applicant. You would answer those same preliminary identification questions, but instead of choosing I am applying for myself, you would choose the option I am helping someone who is not with me and therefore cannot sign the application at this time. What this essentially means is you as the person's representative are submitting an online disability benefit application as a third party for the applicant that you're assisting. Your applicant won't be able to sign the application once you log back in and complete it in its entirety. So it won't be technically what Social Security calls like an authenticated application, but you can complete the whole application online eventually. And then Social Security will mail your applicant a copy of what you submitted online, and they'll have to sign it in ink and date it and mail it back to Social Security, and then it would be considered authenticated. But again, just for the purpose of setting the protective filing date, choose that option. I am helping someone who is not with me and therefore cannot sign the application at this time. And then again, stop at the reentry number, just like we did in scenario number 1. And then save and exit and make sure to write down the reentry number. So once you get to that reentry number page in either one of these scenarios, you've set the protective filing date, and then you have 60 days to kind of process the rest of the SSA forms, get the information you need to complete the entire online disability benefit application, and then submit the whole packet to Social Security before the 60-day deadline. And here's a screenshot of what you'll see when you eventually get to the reentry number screen on Social Security's website. So basically, when you see this screen here and you get your reentry number, you know that the person's protective filing date has been set. And again, a reminder, you have 60 days to complete the full application and submit it to Social Security after the protective filing date's been set. So I know that that is very confusing in the beginning. I've been through it. My first few applications were a little bit clunky because of just it's a little bit nuanced in terms of setting the protective filing date online. But I promise you, once you've done it a few times, it makes more sense and it gets easier. But if you have any questions about that, feel free to put them in the chat, or not in the chat, in the Q&A feature. Or you can reach out to your liaison if you kind of want to talk through that, in more detail. If a person does have a My Social Security account, they can request a copy of their electronic case documents be sent directly to the message center within their My Social Security account. So that's one of
Dan?
the, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We had one question come through, and I just wanted you to take a minute to clarify, because it relates to the last bit of information you were talking about with setting the protective filing date.
Yeah.
So need to confirm, I understand that before submitting a protective filing date, I need to have all medical records and information needed in my possession and ready to complete my MSR.
Yeah, so not necessarily. It is helpful to begin requesting medical records right away when you start meeting with the applicant. But you don't have to, because you have 60 days after setting the protective filing date before you have to submit the full completed application to Social Security, you don't have to have all the medical records in your possession and the medical summary report completed before setting the protective filing date. So, yeah, it's good to start that records collection process right away to get those records coming in, because sometimes the medical treatment providers will take a while to send back the records. But I wouldn't delay setting the protective filing date too much while you're waiting for records to come back. It's a great question. Thanks, Amanda.
No problem. We had one other question. Oh, never mind. It got answered. All right. Thanks, Dan.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, so I was saying that applicants or claimants, as Social Security calls them, can request a copy of their electronic case documents be sent directly to the message center in their My Social Security account. So again, it's helpful to set up the My Social Security account for a few different reasons, this being one of them, but it's not something that everyone needs to create in order to apply for benefits. Okay, so next, I'm going to talk about collecting medical records. So you've set the person's protective filing date, and even though collecting medical records kind of comes after what I just talked about, setting the protective filing date, I think it was Eric that asked about this. You don't need to wait to collect medical records before setting the protective filing date. You can start that right away. And I'm going to talk a little bit about collecting the records. So gathering a person's medical records prior to the submission of the application packet ensures that when you submit the records to DDS, they're receiving complete information about the person's disabling health conditions or diagnoses and their functional limitations that prevent them from working. So we encourage you to start collecting records early in the process, and then to, kind of simultaneously or concurrently work on other aspects of the application while you're waiting for the records to come back. It can be helpful to begin to kind of build relationships with medical records departments that you're frequently requesting records from, to help you to obtain records more quickly and sometimes free of charge. I would say more often than not, if records departments are trying to charge either the applicant or you as their representative for the records that you're requesting, if you call them and explain that you're helping someone that is experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness that has no income, that more often than not, I was successful at getting those fees waived. So, that's kind of what we mean by building relationships. And you may also be able to call and ask if they're able to expedite a request because you're helping someone collect records for the purpose of them applying for Social Security disability benefits, and also because they're experiencing homelessness. We have a couple tools on our website, one of which is a sample medical records tracking worksheet. We also have another tool called the Frequent Medical Records Department Tracking Spreadsheet, which is a really helpful way to kind of organize your effort in collecting medical records for the applicants that you assist. Those are both on that tools and worksheets page that I put a link to in the chat. Okay, so in terms of collecting records, what are the forms that are needed for you to help the applicant to complete? The first one is the SSA 827, which is the authorization to disclose information to SSA. So the original, like the ink signature that you obtain on the 827 will be sent to Social Security as part of the complete SSI and SSDI application packet. And this form is for SSA and DDS to gather medical records and information from the treatment sources that you list on the person's application. So they will be trying to collect records as well. But you also, as the SOAR provider, want to collect records, because if DDS is unable to get records, and you don't want those records to be missing from the person's case file, because it could be critical records that help prove that they're eligible for SSI and SSDI. If the person is able to complete their online disability benefit application online, they may be able to e-sign an 827 at the end of that process. However, we still recommend getting them to sign a paper version of the 827 and to submit that with the other paper forms that you submit to Social Security after doing their online disability application. You will also submit a copy of the 827 to each medical treatment provider that you collect records from for your applicant, along with your agency's release form. So when you go to collect records from the treating sources or where your client has been treated for their disabling health condition, we recommend sending three things. The first is a request letter, and we provide a sample of a medical records request letter on our website. That's also on the tools and worksheets page that I put a link to in the chat. This can be catered for use at your agency. So we recommend sending the request letter, your agency's release form, which authorizes that treatment provider to release your client's records to you as their representative, and then a copy of the signed SSA 827 form. And the reason you send the copy of the SSA 827 form is it informs the treatment provider that you're requesting records from that you're using the records to the reason you're requesting the records is to submit on your client's behalf as part of their disability application to Social Security. It's also important to note that some treatment providers may not accept your agency release of information. They may have their own release of information that they want you to complete with your client while requesting records. So you might have to call the records department for that particular treatment provider to see if they have a specific release form that they want your client to sign in lieu of your agency. Okay, so now that was collecting records and overview. Now we're gonna talk about serving as the applicant's appointed representative. So when you complete, and we're going to talk about the forms associated with that, but when you become a person's appointed representative, um, you as their SOAR provider or their SOAR representative can communicate with both Social Security and the disability determination services in your state about the applicant's disability application. You'll also receive copies of all the notices that your client receives from both SSA and DDS, so you can help your client or the applicant kind of stay on track and respond appropriately to whatever Social Security or DDS is requesting of them. One thing to note is that by serving as a person's appointed representative for their disability claim, you or your agency is not liable for any decisions made by SSA or DDS. So if your client's claim gets denied, you're not liable for that denial. And serving as a person's appointed representative for their disability claim, either SSI or SSDI or both, it's not the same as serving as their representative payee. If your client eventually gets approved for either SSI or SSDI or both, and they need a representative payee, you could connect them with that person in the community. But it's not something that you would that you're by serving as their representative for their disability claim, you're not serving as their representative payee as well. Okay, so Social Security at the end of September of this year, they instituted a new policy change where if you want to serve as someone's appointed representative for their SSI or SSDI claim, you need to actually be registered as a representative with Social Security. And so the way that you get registered as a representative is by submitting the Social Security Form 1699, which is the representative form. You only have to complete and submit the 1699 form once, unless your information changes, like you change agencies or your agency address changes or something like that. But you only need to submit this form once to get registered as a representative. And what will happen is after you get registered as a representative, Social Security will mail you a rep ID that's unique to you, and then you'll put that rep ID on top of the SSA 1696 forms that you submit with your SSI and SSDI applications. And Amanda's going to talk a little bit about 1696 forms, but just a couple other things to note about the 1699. I know this gets confusing because the numbers are so close to each other, but the 1699 form is the form you submit to get registered as a representative. You will need to provide Social Security with your full name, your Social Security number, your date of birth, your home address, and phone number in Section 1. But I just want to let everyone know that the reason they ask for that is because that's how they verify your identity, to confirm you are who you say you are when you're registering as a representative. But this information is not shared with the claimants that you assist or the applicants that you assist. The 1699 form is only between you and Social Security to get you registered. So it is a requirement to get registered as a representative. So you will need to provide that on the 1699. We provide the number that the 1699 needs to be faxed to on this slide. It's also on page 1 of the 1699 form. And like I said, they'll mail you your appointed rep ID within 2 to 3 weeks. After submitting the 1699, then you can begin to start serving as applicants' representatives. And here's a screenshot of what the 1699 looks like. And there's some links on here on this slide about more information about how to get registered as a representative, and also how to complete the 1699 form. It's important to complete it correctly or else Social Security will reject it. If you have any additional questions about that, feel free to reach out to us individually. And I'm going to turn it over to Amanda now.
Thanks, Dan. All right, so like Dan said, you will fill out the SSA 1699 just one time. This is a one-time thing just to get your representative ID number. And then going forward, you'll do the 1696 to appoint yourself as a representative for each of the applicants you'll be working with. So there's been a major update to this form. So even if you took the training recently, the form looks completely different as of last week. So we're going to share that with you today. And you're actually the first group that we are sharing this update with because it is such a new one. So on the new 1696, they're collecting the same information. The layout of the form just looks different. So the claimant's social security number and your rep ID go on top of the form starting on page 4. So this will link you as the representative to the claimant's case with their social security number and name that will be filled out on the rest of the form. It's your way of accepting the appointment of representative and agreeing to serve as someone's representative. When you fill out this form, it opens the doors of communication between Social Security, yourself, Disability Determination Services, and yourself. It also allows for Social Security to send you a copy of anything that they'd be sending to the applicant. So it's really critical. This is a critical component of the SOAR model to complete an appointment of representative for every applicant that you're working with. Otherwise, Social Security won't be able to tell you anything about their case. They're not going to talk to you. They're not going to tell you about appointments that are coming up. So it's a critical component. In section 4, you'll want to check the boxes for Title II disability benefits. Those are SSDI, and Title 16 disability benefits, which is SSI. On the old version, there was one box you could check. Now you have to check both boxes. You're always going to apply for both benefit programs, and we'll talk about that in a minute. In section 5, that's asking questions about you accepting a fee for services. When you're using the SOAR model, it's with the understanding that you're not going to accept a fee for services. In fact, if you're not an attorney, you can't accept a fee for services unless you take a test through Social Security. So in section 6, you'll want to check the box that indicates I waive the right to a fee. You'll hold on to the 1696 until you have submitted the application. That is because there will be nothing to link it to unless an application is filed. If you sent this form to SSA before the actual application was submitted, they wouldn't know what to do with it because they wouldn't have any record of an application on file for the person that you're representing. So hold on to the SSA 1696 until the application is submitted online, and then you'll submit this with the paper portion of your packet to Social Security. There's also an electronic E1696. It can be completed and signed online with a digital signature. However, the applicant will need an email address, and the caseworker will need to provide your personal contact information for that. You'll also need to create a password that you share with the applicant so that you can both have access to this form. It will help ensure that the appointed representative is included in the applicant's file because it will automatically be in the system. It won't be relying on someone transferring that information in when you turn in a paper packet. So if it's feasible, we do recommend doing this, but we also understand that a lot of people that we're helping with SOAR do not have the resources or the ability to electronically sign forms and understand what that means and check an email address and use a password to access the form. So definitely, if it works for you, just stick with the paper form. It's good to know that the E1696 is an option, though, if you can make that work with the people you're serving. This is just a picture of what the different components of the online form looks like. It asks the same exact questions as the paper form. It's just a digital format. Okay, so I noted for the 1696 that you would check the boxes for Title 16 and Title 2 because you always need to apply for both programs. Some people will say, well, I just need to apply for SSI because the person has never worked and they're not going to get SSDI anyway. The problem is SSI is a needs-based program and it's also considered a program of last resort. So Social Security needs to ensure that the person couldn't be receiving income from any other source before they can determine whether they're eligible for SSI or not. We need to show the need. So they're going to ask questions about the applicant's income, resources, and living arrangement. They're also going to look at someone's legal status in the United States and their citizenship and residency status when they're thinking about eligibility. The SSI application is very long, as I know you all know because you did one for the sample case. It has a lot of questions regarding resources, and we know through our work providing SOAR services that most of it doesn't, a lot of the time it does not, it's not a factor with the people that we're serving. However, don't assume that the applicant does or does not have resources. I made a dire mistake on one of my first SOAR-assisted claims. I was helping someone. I didn't ask the question about burial plots. I checked no. Turns out SSA knew that this person had burial plots in their name and we had to redo everything. She did get approved for benefits, but it took forever and it really prolonged her getting access to her money because I checked the wrong box. So while a lot of the questions will be skipped a lot of the times and you won't need to fill out the information, don't make assumptions like I did. This form cannot be completed online. The SSI application needs to be completed on paper. Typically, it's completed by the SSA claims specialist at the field office or over the phone. So like if someone was applying for benefits on their own, they'd fill out the online disability application and then Social Security will call them to complete this form either over the phone or schedule an in-person interview to do it. In many SOAR communities, the SOAR provider has special privileges and access to fill out this form because we've trained you on how to do that. So you can submit it with your paper packet, and that may avoid the need for an interview because you were able to provide all the information Social Security needed to process this part of the application for your applicants. While the full SSA 8000 is only available on paper, SSA also released an ISSI application that can be completed as part of the online disability benefit application. This is a shortened version of the SSA 8000. It's not the same as the 8000. And the applicant, as part of the questions that will automatically be populated if they are found eligible to do this form, will have to answer some additional questions on their online application about income and resources. The eligibility criteria to qualify to do this ISSI application is narrow. It's for people ages 18 to 65. They cannot be blind. They can never have been married and never have applied for or received disability benefits. For this reason, we just recommend always completing and submitting the full SSA 8000, even if the applicant does qualify for the ISSI. This just ensures that Social Security is getting the most complete picture as possible when you're submitting the claim. All right, so SSI is needs-based, and the application for that focuses heavily on someone's income, resources, and living arrangement. SSDI is an insurance program. It's not needs-based. You can have $1 million in the bank and your spouse could be making $100,000 a year. But if you are unable to earn substantial gainful activity because of a disabling condition, and you've paid in and bought this insurance for yourself, then you are eligible to receive SSDI. So they're not going to collect information about your resources, assets, or living arrangement when you apply for this. They're just looking at what are your current earnings and what did your work history look like. I say all this with the caveat that a person doesn't necessarily have to have the strong work history to qualify for SSDI. They may also qualify based on a parent's or a spouse's earnings record. So again, that's another reason why we're always applying for both programs, even if you think the applicant might not qualify, because they could qualify for another reason other than just their own earnings history. The SSDI application also looks at potential eligibility for other benefit programs like workers' compensation and VA benefits. And SSA prefers online submissions for this. You could submit the SSA 16 using the SOAR model. What we highly recommend is doing everything online using the online application for disability. So the SSDI application, you practiced filling this one out as part of the SOAR online course. You can use that paper form as a worksheet. So what I do when I'm setting up meetings with my applicants is I will do one section of the MSR interview guide, and then the other half of my appointment, I will work on one worksheet with them. So I'd fill this out on paper as a worksheet. And then on the day I'm ready to submit the application for benefits, I would transfer the information from the paper form that we worked on together in interviews into the online application on the day I'm ready to submit. The SSA 3368 is the adult disability report. So this is the portion of the application where Social Security is looking at what conditions someone has, what is their level of education, what types of work have they engaged in the past, and what treatment and evaluations they've received. It is essential to provide complete information on this form. Do not leave out any diagnoses, physical or mental health. A person isn't approved based on one diagnosis. DDS looks at the cumulative or a holistic view of the applicant to see how all of their mental and physical health conditions interact and culminate in them meeting the definition of disability. I hear a lot that, oh, we listed this because it's their primary diagnosis. There's no such thing as a primary diagnosis when you're applying for disability. List all diagnoses and do as best job as you can to show how all of those conditions work together to impact someone's ability to work. This is also what DDS uses as their roadmap for where they're going to request medical records. So it's really important to provide information on every mental and physical health treatment provider that the applicant has seen. Indicate in the remarks section which medical records you'll be submitting with the application so DDS knows that those will be coming through from you. And if there's any conditions that the applicant has not received treatment, there were some questions that came in through the Q&A, which were asking like, hey, I'm working with someone that hasn't had any treatment recently. What should I submit their application? And you can list the conditions that they're telling you about. on the list of impairments at the beginning of this form. And in the remarks section, you can say, hey, they are experiencing really severe back pain, but they haven't received treatment or evaluations for this because they don't have medical insurance right now. And what DDS will do is they'll say, okay, well, we need to evaluate how this back pain is affecting their ability to work. So we're going to send them for a consultative exam. So just to provide some follow-up to that question that was in the Q&A, that you can, even if someone has not received treatment for a condition, you should still list it on the list of impairments, and then talk about which evaluations are still needed, so that DDS can make sure that those happen. SSA prefers online submissions for this. The good news is the online disability application, it's combined with the 16 and the 3368. So when you submit an application online, you're taking care of both of these paper forms just in one neat package. But like with the 16, you'll use the paper form as a worksheet to gather the information so that you'll have everything together in front of you on the day you're ready to submit the application online. So like I just said, the information that you collected on the paper forms of the 16 and the 3368 will be used to complete the online disability benefit application. It's broken down into 4 steps. The first step is to provide your background information and like the non-medical evidence about your eligibility for SSDI benefits, the SSA 16. The second step is to provide your disability information, list your impairments, provide information about your employment and education history and any treatment that the applicant has received. That's the 3368. The fourth step is to sign an E-827. It's an electronic version of the 827 that you had the applicant sign when you started collecting medical records. And then the fourth step is a confirmation. So this is a confirmation page that the application has been submitted. It's time-stamped, so you need to print this out to keep in your records. It also comes with a personalized cover sheet that you'll use as the top page when you're going to submit the paper packet of the application to your local SSA field office. If you selected that someone was applying for themselves when you started the application must be present when you're completing the online application, and they must click the continue and the submit buttons throughout the steps. This is the applicant providing their electronic signature. If the applicant was not with you and you selected that you're helping someone apply for benefits, but they are not with you, they don't need to be there when you're completing and submitting the application. But again, it comes with the understanding that Social Security is going to send them a copy of this application. They're going to need to provide their wet signature and send it back to Social Security. Don't forget to use the remarks section. You can use the remarks section on the 8000 and the online disability report to indicate that this is a SOAR-assisted application. You can let the SSA person know if the applicant is experiencing or at risk of homelessness, and if they've had any difficulties completing the form. You can also provide additional information or clarification to responses for questions, but make sure to reference the number from the question that you are clarifying. SSA looks for keywords that they can use to put flags on the case, which will expedite claims. So words like homeless, veteran, wounded warrior, those are all things that would flag a claim for further expedition of the decision. So I'm going to give an example of what I wrote in the remarks section when I was providing SOAR services. So the first thing I would write in all caps is, this is a SOAR-assisted application. My name is Amanda Starkey, and I am the SOAR representative for the claim. This person is experiencing homelessness, and she had a lot of difficulties completing this form due to poor memory. She needed a lot of help completing this form by me as her representative. For question 6 regarding her work history, we estimated her work dates to the best of her ability, but she didn't remember exact dates. So that would be an example of what I would write in the remarks section when I was submitting claims. Okay, so this is in red because we want to show you that this might look a little different where you're at. Again, we're training on the standard SOAR process. Your specific state or the SSA field office you work with might do things a little bit differently. In general, this is what the process looks like when it's time to submit an application. Okay, so you've completed all of your interviews, you've gathered all of the information needed to fill out the forms, and you have your MSR written or very close to being written. At this point, you know that you're just about ready to submit the application for benefits. So you'll want to call your contact at your SSA field office about 1 to 2 weeks before the 60-day deadline for the protective filing date to request an appointment to submit the completed application. Some field offices will say you don't need an appointment, just submit the application and drop off the paper packet the next day. That's fine. Some will say, okay, thanks, we'll set up this appointment for you on this date. Once you get to a day or two before that appointment is scheduled, you'll want to log in and complete and submit the online disability benefit application. The next day or the day after that, you'll submit the completed application packet, the paper portion, using the SOAR checklist for initial claims as your cover sheet. That's available in the SOAR tools and worksheets page on our website. So you'll submit the online application and you'll either send certified mail or drop off in person using the Dropbox or at the designated appointment time, the paper portion of the application. If you have less than 20 pages of medical records, you can bring that with you with the paper packet, but we really recommend just holding on to the medical records and submit those directly to DDS once they receive the claim. So this reviews that process again. Make sure to record your confirmation number and print it just to keep for your record. So it will be timestamped so that you can keep it. Sometimes things happen and they may use a different application date, but you'll have the stamped confirmation number, so you'll be able to show proof of when the application was submitted. All right, so now with the electronic records express and barcoded cover sheet for faxing, those are 2 ways to submit the applicant's records. So after you had your appointment with Social Security, they will process all of the non-medical information and then send the case on to Disability Determination Services. In the best case scenario, this usually happens within about a week or so. Some offices are really behind and it takes longer, like more like a month, to get a case to Disability Determination Services. But once DDS receives the case, you will receive a letter in the mail where the DDS examiner will introduce themselves, and it'll also have a worksheet with a barcode on it, and you can use that as your cover sheet for faxing all of the medical records and your medical summary report to your disability examiner. Once it's faxed in, it'll be uploaded automatically right into the applicant's case file. The other option is to use a system called Electronic Records Express. This is a free system that allows representatives to upload electronic medical records directly into the applicant's file themselves. So you don't have to worry about using a fax machine or waiting to get that barcoded cover sheet in the mail. Electronic Records Express is state specific because it goes through disability determination services, and DDS are state agencies that are contracted by SSA. So you will have to contact the Electronic Records Express department for whatever state that you're in, and they can walk you through getting registered in Electronic Records Express. So this is what a complete SOAR packet looks like. The first thing is the SOAR checklist for initial claims. This is just a cover sheet that will tell SSA which forms you've already submitted and which ones are coming with the paper packet. A paper copy of the SSA 1696, a copy of the SSA 827, a copy of, or the original copy of the SSA 8000, the SSI application. You'll check the boxes for the 16 and the 3368 because those will be submitted online for the online disability application. And then once the claim gets to DDS, you'll submit the signed medical summary report and copies of all of the medical records in rough chronological order for the DDS examiner to review. And all of the work that you've done leading up to submitting a SOAR claim, this will be your end result. These are the things that you'll be turning into Social Security and DDS. All right, so we got through all of the technical stuff. I wanted to pause before we take a break just to see if there's any questions I should answer. Dan or Daz, anything?
We have answered a lot of questions in the Q&A, and there have been a few more that have come in. So I think we'll respond to those, I think, in the Q&A, and we can have everyone take a break, I think.
Okay, sounds good. So it is about 3:30, so let's give it, you're actually gonna get 3 extra minutes. We'll get till 3:40 Eastern time. So either 3:40, 2:40, or 1:40, maybe earlier than that, depending on if you're in Alaska or Hawaii. And we'll get back together and finish off the second half, which is going to focus more on the medical information and documenting disability. So thank you for joining us for the first half. Take a break, walk around, and we'll see you in about 12 minutes.
All right, seems like we got some folks here. Thank you, Kathy. We'll go ahead and get started. We're moving into Social Security mental health disorder listings. And as mentioned previously, when we talked about the sequential evaluation, we talked about how step 3 was the first opportunity to have someone approved according to the listings. And so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what the listings are and why they're so important. So SSA's listings of impairment is a list of disabling impairments organized by body systems. It lists specific criteria under which the applicant who experiences them may qualify medically for Social Security disability benefits. Long story short, the listings is basically the recipe on what is needed for Social Security to find someone disabled. And so it's printed, it's basically something that's at your, you have access to that information. It's available online, and we're going to look through that. It's important because the listings are the roadmap. It's the key to the city. It's all the information that you need to help tell you exactly the signs and symptoms that the applicant needs to have in order to qualify for benefits. And you should use them and reference them on every single claim. And that's important to note. Just because people have the same diagnoses doesn't mean that they experience the symptoms associated with that diagnosis the same. So we really need to make sure that we have information covered and necessary according to the listings to help DDS see that the applicant meets those listings. So the way that you can find the listings of impairments is with this link above, listings, SSA.gov, disability, professionals, blue book listing, adult listings. Or you can simply go to SSA.gov, look in and type in their search engine box listings, and you'll come up with adult listings, and you also have child listings. Select adult listings if you're working with adults, check child listings if you're working with children. And what you'll find, and this is the page that is displayed for adult listings, and what you'll find here is that the listings are divided into body systems from 1 to 12. For many of the folks that we work with, we'll kind of land here at the 12.0 mental disorders listings. I know that those are, when I was doing applications, that's where most of my claims were, right there in that kind of area there. And so with recognizing that these are divided into body systems, whatever kind of allegation of conditions that the applicant provides to you, look up the listing for whatever diagnosis they say they have, whether it's musculoskeletal, skin disorders, whatever they say they have, because what we want to do is be able to meet or equal the listings. Equaling the listings means that Social Security and DDS will look at all conditions that are reported by the applicant and see if the combination of conditions will help them equal that listing. And so it's really important to include both physical health and mental health disorders for every claim. And so the listings is divided into 3 paragraphs when they're describing what's necessary in order to find someone disabled and eligible for payment. And so these 3 paragraphs include paragraphs A, B, and C, and they're literally labeled just like that, A, B, and C. So paragraph A, under the description of each of the listings, discusses medical criteria that must be present in order in the medical evidence. So that's that medical documentation. Paragraph B is that functional criteria that is assessed on a 5-point rating scale from none, right? None meaning that the person is not disabled, to extreme where there's extreme functional limitations. And we want to be able to provide enough information, evidence, and examples to illustrate that that is closer to the extreme side. And then there's paragraph C that the criteria used here is to evaluate the serious and persistent mental disorders. And so it's looking at the longevity, how long that is. And we'll see those in specific examples. And this applies to all mental disorder listings except for 12.05, which is intellectual disorders. This slide illustrates it best. And so we've taken all the mental health disorder listings and put it into this really easy to read chart here. And what you'll see to the right is the medical criteria associated with each of those listing criteria. And so for 12.02 to 12.04, we see that paragraph A is necessary, which is the medical documentation and the functional information or medical criteria and basic longevity. So you can have A and B to meet these listings, or A and C. And many of the listings look like that. So you see that 12.07 until 12.13 is just requiring A and B. They have to have both, right? The unique listing is intellectual disorders, which was mentioned in the slide before, where you only have to have one or the other, talking about either there has to be medical criteria or functional information that could be included. Medical criteria that's associated with intellectual disorder can be produced in medical records through testing. And so if that's the case, then only A is needed. But if only have the functional information, it has to be very detailed so that DDS can see that limitation in the same way that you do. And so when you are working with individuals, it's really important to be aware of what the listings are asking. The information is there for you to review. To satisfy the B criteria or the functional information criteria, your mental disorder, the applicant's mental disorder must result in extreme limitations in one or marked limitations in two of the 4 areas of mental functioning using that 5-point rating scale. So they're going to look at no limitation, mild limitations, moderate, marked, and extreme. Those are the 5-point rating scales, which makes me chuckle every time I say it because there's no like distinguishing factor from one scale to the other, except by the information that we provide, right? The examples that we provide to help the reader or DDS recognize that this is more than just a mild limitation based on all these examples that I'm giving you, so that we can see, so that DDS can see the applicant struggles in the same way that we do. That's why it's really important to write about as much as you can about the functional limitations in each of the 4 functional areas. Limitations reflects the degree to which the applicant's mental disorder interferes with their ability to function independently, appropriately, effectively, and on a sustained basis. So anytime you have an opportunity to write about how that individual struggles to function independently, appropriately, effectively, and consistently on a sustained basis, those are the examples that you want to use in order to distinguish between something that could be considered mild or something that could be considered marked or extreme. And so the more examples that we provide, the better. All right, so here are the 4 functional areas for mental disorders. So understand, remember, and applying information. That's where we discuss the applicants struggle with memory, following instructions, solving problems. Do they get easily confused if you are instructing someone to do 3 tasks in a row? Do they forget the first one by the time that they recite to you what the third one is? Do they have trouble interacting with others? Do they get along with others in the community or at work? Do they struggle with those efforts? Are they easily angered? Are they avoidant? Are those kind of responses and interactions related to how they do their work? If so, make that plain and illustrate those struggles in your MSR when you're describing how a person has struggles with interacting with others. Concentrate, persist, and maintain pace is another functional area. That's when we want to talk about any struggle that they have with completing tasks. Are they easily distracted? Do they lose focus on details? Do they fail to complete tasks because they're so distracted? And then adapt and manage oneself, talking about, how their response is to change, setting realistic goals, how are they able to manage their hygiene, all those things that influence how someone is able to perform at work. Activities of daily living will be considered throughout all of these functional areas, so there's no need to write that, as if that's a separate kind of area. Activities of daily living can be infused in each of these functional areas, and we encourage you to write about any struggles with activities of daily living that can show up in any of the 4 functional areas. And we'll cover a lot of that during the MSR refresher portion of this training. So for functional impairments, the applicant must demonstrate a significant limitations in meeting physical, mental, sensory, or other requirements of work. So we're going to look at sitting, standing, bending, stooping, seeing, and hearing to evaluate any limited ability to perform those kinds of physical demands during work, and anything that may reduce the person's ability to do past work or other work, which is really important because that goes along with the sequential evaluation. Once again, where Social Security is looking at whether or not someone can do any past work or if they can do any other work. So looking at all of that is really important for physical conditions. So I've talked a lot about how to document that and why it's important to document functional limitations for people that we're working with. We want to be able to do that by collecting medical records from all of our treatment sources, including information that's reported by the applicant or collateral sources, friends, family, other service providers, and any common treatment providers, right? And if the medical records are not current, we need to rearrange for assessments for these folks because mental status exams are needed within they're needed within 90 days of submitting the application. And the diagnosis has to be from an acceptable medical source, a doctor, nurse, a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant. It has to be from an acceptable medical source. And records are used to meet the listings. We really encourage you to not only organize your work and keep them in chronological order when you can, but really reference the information that you've learned from the medical records and translate that information into the MSR, highlighting the things that you want to ensure that DEDS sees. So any information about someone's functional limitations that are included in medical records are jewels, and we really want to highlight those in the MSR. These are some examples from the case studies that we've used from the online course. Here we have Michael Barnes, who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, TBI, PTSD, and hepatitis C. Now, we want to look at all of these diagnoses in case we want to cover our bases to ensure that the person equals a listing as well, right? And so for Mike, his primary diagnosis was schizophrenia. So we pulled the 12.03 listing for schizophrenia, and you can see what they're asking for paragraph A, which is the medical documentation of one or more of the following. We have to have examples of delusions or hallucinations, examples of disorganized thinking or speech, or an example of grossly disorganized behavior or catatonia. And so we need this for at least one of the following, right? We need to talk about this very thoroughly for any of those three examples. We need to talk about one of them to satisfy the requirement for A and B, because at the top it says satisfied by A and B or A and C. So we have to have A, and we also can see that we have to have B, extreme limitations in one or marked limitations in two of the following. And it's just asking for information for any of the four functional areas that we just described. Although it says limitations in one or marked limitations in two, don't stop at just writing about one or two. Write about all of them if the applicant has limitations in all of the functional areas. Write about, every single one of them and provide examples if vivid examples are available. We know that we have to have at least one, but oftentimes for the people that we work with, we know that there are always more than one. Well, typically more than one. And so we want to write about that in order for DDS to see the limitations in the same way that we do. We don't want to just write about someone's struggle to understand, remember, and apply information just because we consider it as extreme, right? when they also have trouble with interacting with others and they have trouble concentrating, if we don't write about that, then DDS won't know. And so we want them to know about all the limitations and not just stop at what we consider enough evidence for DDS to make a decision. Give them more than what they need so that they can make a decision as fast as they can. For Mike, he also had PTSD. So again, we always encourage you to look at all of the listings for all the impairments that are reported by the applicant or included in medical records. So we know that PTSD was also included for Mike in the medical records and based on information that was shared by collateral sources. So for this condition, trauma-related or stressor-related disorders, we use this listing to satisfy A and B or A and C, right? And so we have medical documentation of all of the following: exposure to actual or threatened death, subsequent involuntary or re-experiencing traumatic events, avoidance of external reminders of the event, disturbance in mood and behavior, increases in arousal or reactivity. And so there was lots of examples in the online course that could really be included or should have been included in your practice case to illustrate Mike's struggle in this area of functioning as a response to his trauma and stressor related disorder of PTSD. And so we encourage you to write about all of those things. And also for B, you know, we still have the examples of all the 4 functional areas that can be also written about or illustrated and described in your MSR to help the reader or DDS to recognize the limitations and the severity of those symptoms the way that you do. For Colette, her diagnosis was bipolar disorder, diabetes, and hypertension. We pulled the listings for bipolar disorder. For bipolar, medical documentation of the requirements of paragraph 1 or 2. Depressive disorder is characterized by all of these kinds of symptoms here: depressed mood, diminished interest, appetite disturbance, sleep disturbance, decreased energy, thoughts of death or suicide. In the practice case for Colette, there were tons of examples that provided enough information to write about many of these characteristics. And so the depressive disorder is characterized by 5 or more of the following characteristics. So we can write about all of these things because in the information provided by Colette, she's provided information about her struggle with every single one of these thoughts. I mean, every single one of these characteristics. So we also encourage that B, because it's required, A and B, extreme limitations in one of the following. And so you would continue to write about the mental health disorder, the mental health functional areas, and write about each one of the applicant struggles to function in each one of these areas: understand and remember, interact with other people, concentrate, and adapt and manage change. For Colette, there were tons of examples that illustrated her struggle to understand, remember, or apply information. Her struggle to interact with others oftentimes resulted in police interaction and ultimately her arrest at the time that the caseworker met with them. They were incarcerated. Her struggle with concentration, persistence, and maintaining pace at her workstations, creating work that wasn't asked for by the supervisors, or rearranging things to make the system better. And then she oftentimes cried a lot and had a hard time managing her emotions and her interactions with her kids, and being nagged by her sister to attend to her hygiene. Those are all examples that can really amplify or spotlight the applicant struggles to function in each one of those areas. And so again, we just encourage you to pull the listings from all of those kinds of diagnoses that are reported by the applicant or included in the medical records, and make sure that we provide enough information to illustrate that the applicant's struggles in each one as a result of the symptoms that they were experiencing based on their diagnoses. I know that was super fast, but it's really a area that really has to be used in the SOAR process. Looking at the listings to ensure that you write about and provide enough evidence for that the applicant that illustrates their functional limitations in all four of the areas of functioning is so necessary. And it will give you the opportunity to get it done as early as possible. And what I mean by get it done, step 3 is the first opportunity for someone to be approved for disability benefits. If we include as much information as possible that meets the listing, our results should be favorable. And so knowing that, we need to look at the listings. All right, so if you have any questions, just let us know. I see one in the chat. How do you access the listings? Hopefully I was able to answer that, Bonnie, but just as a repeat, you can go to the SSA.gov website, put listings in the search engine box, and you'll come up with the adult listings or child listings, whichever one you choose. Or you can use the web address in the link that's included in the slides, and you'll get a copy of the slides. Oh, the copy of the slides are already posted, so you can get them there. All right, I think I'm passing it on to Dan to discuss the review session medical summary report refresher portion.
Yeah. I just wanted to chime in really quick. So I put the link to the adult listings in the chat, so you can use that. Just star it in your web browser, since you need to use the listings for every applicant you work with anyway, to help paint that roadmap for you of how you're going to gather information and what you need to focus on. Just star it so that you have it saved on your web browser.
That's a great tip, Amanda. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both, Desiree and Amanda. I am going to speak to the medical summary report, which is one of the SOAR critical components that should be completed with each SSI and SSDI application that you submit using the SOAR model. And so the MSR is the name, I think, can be a little bit confusing to some people because it does say medical summary report, but it doesn't. This is written by you as the SOAR trained service provider and the person's representative. So you don't need to be a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a trained clinician in order to write a medical summary report. The medical summary report is really like a letter that you're writing on behalf of your applicant that really summarizes in detail what your applicant's disabling health conditions are that are preventing them from working, and how the symptoms of their disabling health conditions, whether they be mental or physical health symptoms that they're experiencing, are causing them either marked or extreme functional limitations that prevent them from working. And so the medical summary report's really kind of a mix of what the applicant is reporting to you, what you're observing as their representative or their case manager, and then also, importantly, a summary of what you're finding in the medical records. So it's kind of a mix of those three things. And sometimes you may also receive information from collateral sources, like maybe the applicant's family member, if you're able to get a release signed and interview a family member that knows about their symptoms and their functional limitations. They may have another service provider that they're working with that you're able to interview and get information to include in the MSR about their symptoms and functional limitations. It's really kind of a summary or collective document that containing all that information that just helps to prove that they either meet or equal one of those listings that Desiree just talked about. And really, It's not something that you're submitting in place of medical records. DDS will need the medical records to find a diagnosis that the person's been diagnosed with and to read about the person's treatment history for whatever their disabling health condition is. But the medical summary report is a way of kind of summarizing the most pertinent information and providing it to DDS as supplemental evidence to help prove your client is eligible for disability benefits. And the medical summary report aims to provide a clear link between the person's conditions, the symptoms associated with their conditions, and their functional limitation. In some communities, the medical summary report may take the place of a form that Social Security uses, which is the 3373 function report. In other communities, the medical summary report does not take the place of the 3373. You have to do both. So, if DDS mails your client a 3373 or they mail one to you as your client's representative, and they're requesting that you fill it out, you just fill it out and send it back. So, you may have to do both, and that's okay. The 3373 collects similar information to the MSR, but it's a shorter form, and there's not as much room to include as much detail as you want to include in the MSR. So you do want to do both if you're required to do so. Dazra talked about this a little bit, but the MSR, if it's co-signed by the applicant's treating physician or nurse practitioner or other medical acceptable medical source, then it is considered medical evidence by DDS. So if you're able to write a medical summary report and partner with the applicant's treating doctor or other acceptable medical source to co-sign the MSR, that's helpful because it kind of elevates the MSR to medical evidence in the eyes of DDS. So these are the different sections or components of the MSR, and I'm going to go through each section individually and highlight what to include in each section of the MSR. Okay, so the first section is the introduction section. This doesn't have to be very long, usually a paragraph or two, where you're going to provide the applicant's name, their demographics, their age. You definitely want to state what their disabling health conditions are, kind of in the first sentence or two of the introduction, because that's really why they're applying for disability benefits. So you kind of want to make that known to DDS right away in the MSR. You can also include a few observations that you have made during your meetings with the applicant, if anything really stands out. Like, for example, if you had Mike as your practice case applicant during the case management meetings with Mike, he was frequently very symptomatic. He was experiencing auditory hallucinations, a lot of paranoia, a lot of hypervigilance. And so providing a few descriptions of what you observed during case management meetings with Mike and these symptoms that you observed would kind of help to DDS to kind of get a picture of Mike, because DDS really doesn't meet the applicant. Well, they never meet the applicant in person. They're really kind of making a decision about whether they're eligible for disability benefits based on their medical records and any other supplemental information that's included in the application, such as the MSR. So providing those descriptions of the symptoms and the mannerisms or functional limitations that you observed helps DDS kind of get a picture and personalizes the applicant a little more, because they're making their decision based on paper, basically medical records and other supplemental information submitted with the claim. In the introduction, you can also, I would always usually write like a sentence just saying, my name is Dan Coladonato. I work for this agency as a SOAR benefits specialist, and I'm also serving as the applicant's 1696 representative to help the applicant navigate through the SSI and/or SSDI claims process, just so DDS knows who you are and why you're submitting the medical summary report on behalf of your applicant. So for personal history, this section you don't want to get too carried away with. And what I mean by that is you don't need to write the person's entire life story in here. You want to include information about the person's personal history if it's relevant to why they're applying for disability benefits. So I'll give two examples from the case studies in the SOAR online course. So if you had Colette as a practice case study, Colette experienced abuse, both physical and sexual abuse growing up. And one of her first suicide attempt was at age 13, which coincided with the abuse that she experienced in her home. And so that could be something that you could include in here because it was kind of the start of her mental health symptoms and the first time that she was hospitalized for psychiatric reasons or mental health reasons. So that would be relevant to include for Colette. If you had Mike as your case study, Mike also experienced abuse in his home growing up, and oftentimes his father would physically abuse him using a belt. And into adulthood, Mike was very paranoid about individuals that wore belts. And it was possibly connected to the abuse he experienced growing up. Also, he would report that there were listening devices installed in belts and phones, and he didn't want to meet with people that were wearing belts. And so this kind of information is what you would include in the personal history. So you can provide kind of a brief overview of the person's personal history and focus on providing information that's relevant to the person's disabling health conditions and their current functional limitations that are preventing them from working. Additionally, it is important to include some information about the person's education. So DDS does consider, when they're evaluating disability claims, they consider a person's age, their education level, and their past work experience. So you always want to include what the person's highest level of education was, and if they had any functional limitations in school. And this is especially important if the person is younger. So if say the person's 20 years old, so they're applying for disability benefits as an adult, but maybe they haven't really worked at all, or they have very limited work history because they're very young. If they had, significant issues with functioning while they were in school, like they received special education services, they had an IEP, any testing done while they were in school, that could be very helpful to like supplemental evidence to highlight even though they're being evaluated under the adult standard for disability, that is helpful evidence and context because an individual that's young wouldn't have the work history as, the more extensive work history that an older individual would. Okay, with legal history, very similar to the personal history section, the legal history, the information that you provide in this section should be provided if it relates to the person's disabling health conditions or symptoms associated with the disabling health conditions and their functional limitations. We know, my experience with helping applicants that are experiencing homelessness is that some of them have pretty extensive legal histories because they're living on the street. A lot of them are. They're sometimes experiencing very severe mental health symptoms, and unfortunately, a lot of circumstances, they have interactions with law enforcement, and they may have an extensive incarceration history or arrest record. So that's a reality for a lot of people that are experiencing homelessness. But when it comes to applying for disability benefits, it's not really relevant to their claim to like list all the times they've been arrested or all the times they've been incarcerated, unless it relates to their mental health symptoms. It may actually cause some bias if you just list like 20 incarcerations without any context for why they were incarcerated. So Dazra talked about this a little bit when she was presenting on the listings, but if you think back to the practice case for the SOAR online course, if you had Colette, there was one instance in her recent past where she was experiencing severe manic symptoms associated with her bipolar disorder, and she was harassing patrons of a local business, and the police were called, and she ended up getting taken to the local hospital for psychiatric stabilization. So Colette had contact with law enforcement for, that was a direct result of her mental health symptoms. She was taken to the hospital as a result. So that would be something relevant to include in legal history for Colette. Similar, if you had Mike as your practice case study, Mike was very frequently experiencing psychotic symptoms in the community. And would oftentimes get in shouting matches with people and would make threatening statements at times. So police were frequently called. He was taken to the hospital sometimes. He was taken to jail sometimes. So these would be examples of information you can include in legal history because it relates to the symptoms and functional limitations of the person's disabling health conditions. Again, no need to just provide a long list of incarcerations or arrest history if there's no context, because DDS really doesn't need it. They need information about why the person can't work because of their mental health symptoms. So those are just a few examples. Another thing that could be relevant to include in legal history is if a person has been in jail or in prison and they received treatment for their mental and or physical health conditions while in jail or prison, you could highlight that in this section as well. They were taken to jail, and because of the mental health symptoms they were experiencing while in jail, they were referred to mental health services, or they were put in a special unit for individuals who needed some extra services related to mental health. So that would be relevant to their disability claim. Okay, employment history section of the MSR. Obviously, you're trying to help prove to DDS that the person's unable to work because of their disabling health conditions. So this is an important one to be as detailed as you can. DDS is looking at the person's past 5 years of work. You're going to generally put their date of disability on their application as their last day of work. And so look back 5 years. And in this section, describe any jobs that they had in the past 5 years, how long they stayed at each job, what tasks did they perform at the jobs, each job, any struggles that they had at work, and why they left each job. And if you can connect their difficulties in maintaining work to the symptoms of their disabling health conditions, that's even better. You can include quotes from the applicant. If you're able to interview former employers, that can be helpful. I know sometimes that's difficult to achieve. Some employers don't want to talk about past employees and they have rules against that. But you can try to get releases signed for former employers to gather collateral information about a person's work history. The next section is physical health treatment. So in this section, you would want to provide if the person doesn't have any physical health conditions, you can, and that goes for any sections of the MSR. So like if a person doesn't have legal history, you can just delete that section heading. You don't need to cover it. Same thing for physical health treatment. If a person doesn't have any physical health conditions that they're diagnosed with or that they report, you can take it out. But if they do, you want to list all the physical health conditions. Review try to find if there's a SSA listing for that physical health condition, and then use that listing as a guide for what to include in this section. But you want to provide an overview of the treatment that the applicant received from their treatment providers that treat their physical health conditions. Another thing is that if a person has physical health conditions but struggles with, maintaining treatment for them, if that's somehow related to their mental health condition and their mental health symptoms, you would want to mention that in this section as well. Both the practice case studies, there was instances of this. Colette was diagnosed with diabetes and hypertension, but because of her depression, she was oftentimes unable to follow up with treatment for those conditions. So they went untreated and they were uncontrolled. Same thing for Mike. One big thing with Mike is that he had a fear of devices being planted in his body. And so he would oftentimes not seek treatment because of that reason. So that would be relevant to include in this section as well. Okay, so the mental health treatment section. The way I like to organize this section is I like to provide a paragraph for each treatment provider. So oftentimes when I was helping with applications, and I'll say that most of the applications I assisted with were individuals who had severe and persistent mental health diagnoses. And so a lot of them were treated at the agency I worked for on an outpatient basis by our psychiatrist or nurse practitioner. But oftentimes they also had pretty lengthy psychiatric hospitalizations as well. And so a lot of times I was summarizing the treatment that they were currently receiving from the psychiatrist at the program that I worked at, but also summarizing the inpatient psychiatric treatment that they received at local hospitals in San Diego, where I worked at the time. So I would provide a summary of the treatment that the person received at each treatment provider, and I like to separate out by paragraph just because I thought it made it easier for DDS to digest that way. But for each treatment provider, you want to emphasize why they were seen. So what led them to being treated by that provider, um, any recent evaluations that were completed by the provider, and any diagnoses that were established by the provider, the doctor who provided the treatment, any medication that they were prescribed, and any quotes that you can find in the person's medical records that documents their symptoms and or functional limitations. And then finally, you can conclude with an overview of when the person most recently received a mental status exam. And typically mental status exams, sorry everyone, I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat, so I'm having trouble talking right now. Typically, mental status exams are completed with every psychiatric visit with a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner. So you just want to find that most recent note from the psychiatrist, and you can put the specific details of when that mental status exam was completed. So, as an example, for one of the practice cases, Colette was seen in May of 2022 by Dr. Baines at XYZ Community Mental Health Center for a psychiatric evaluation and updated mental status exam. And then you can even just put a little note like C XYZ Community Mental Health Center mental status exam for more information. You're kind of you're you're pointing DDS to the relevant medical records that you're going to submit on behalf of your client. That's a big part of the MSR as well. Okay, so if a person has a substance use disorder or a co-occurring substance use and mental health disorder, you would want to include this section as well. Um, you don't need to write a long story about the person's substance use history. You can provide, a brief summary of their history with substances and highlight if they report why they use certain substances. If you think back to the practice case, if you had Mike, he would use opiates primarily or alcohol at times to help quiet the voices in his head or the radio noises, as he put it. So, he was using illicit substances to quiet the auditory hallucinations he was experiencing, the symptoms of the schizophrenia diagnosis that he was given. So that would be relevant to include in a substance use section for Mike. The big thing with the substance use disorder or the substance use section is to look through the records to see if you can find if the person had periods of sobriety that are documented in the records. And a lot of times these can be documented in like longer term hospital stays or if the person was incarcerated and they received mental health treatment while in jail or prison, or if the person went to an inpatient substance use treatment program. If you can get those records and look to see if there's any documentation of the person still experiencing mental health symptoms in the absence of substance use. Because a person, you need to try to help prove, and this is easier said than done, I'll say that, but you need to try to help prove that the person's substance use is not material to their disability. In other words, the substance use is not causing them to be unable to work or causing them to be disabled. Because a person can't qualify for Social Security disability benefits or SSI for a substance use disorder alone. There has to be another severe condition or impairment, either mental or physical. So if you can summarize the person's symptoms that they experienced during periods of sobriety in this section that you find in their medical records, that can go a long way in helping to prove that the person's substance use is not material to their disability. So for the functional limitation section in the MSR, this should really be, and Dazara talked a lot about this, so I won't go into great detail about it, but this really should be one of the most detailed sections of the MSR because unfortunately in medical records, there oftentimes is documentation about the person's mental health symptoms, but there's not always a ton of information about the functional limitations that the symptoms cause the person. So you can really, do the best you can to provide as much detailed information as you can in this functional information section to help prove that the person meets the requirements in that paragraph B of the mental health disorder listings that Dazara talked about. And Daz said this as well, but you want to address all 4 areas of mental functioning, even if it's the case that maybe the person has more limitations in the interact with others area compared to the adapt and manage oneself. Still address all 4 areas and provide descriptions of the person's functional limitations in all 4 areas to the best of your ability using the information that you gather from the applicant, your own personal observations, and information that you find in the person's medical records. You can also discuss any side effects that the person experiences due to medications that they're taking. And then it's also helpful to provide any information about if the person provides extra support. I know the program I worked for, we provided a high level of case management support to the folks that we served. So we would oftentimes be seeing them 3, 4, even sometimes 5 times a week to provide case management services. Not me personally, but the team that I worked on. And so, they provided, the person may appear to function better than if they weren't receiving that level of support from us in the community. So if that's the case for the clients that you're serving, you would want to note that because maybe they're only functioning the way they are because they're getting a high level of support from a case management program or a family member or whatever the case may be. So these are the 4 areas of mental functioning. Dazara was very eloquent with talking about how to provide examples of functional limitations in all 4 of these areas. One thing I just want to remind everyone is that after you finish the SOAR online course, you still have access to all of the content in the SOAR online course. So you're welcome to log back into your SOARworks account on our website and review the articles and the videos within the SOAR online course. And I always like to remind people that class number 5 is where we talk about the MSR and also where we talk about documenting functional limitations. And I think it's really helpful when you get ready to write your first MSR to just log into the SOAR online course and pull up we have a separate article for each of the 4 areas of mental functioning. And under each article, there's kind of examples of the information that DDS is looking for in terms of the person's functional limitations. And we also provide sample descriptions, functional descriptions for each of the 4 areas. So it might be helpful to just have that pulled up when you're writing your first MSR for the applicant that you're helping with. So, just throwing that out there because it's helpful. And the interview guide is also, the MSR interview guide tool is also helpful for gathering information about the person's functional limitations in all 4 areas of mental functioning. And I think Dazara mentioned this, but just a reminder that DDS only uses these 4 areas of functioning for people that have mental health disabilities or alleged mental health disabilities. So if a person only has a physical health condition, they're not going to be evaluating their functioning in these 4 areas. These only pertain to the mental health disorder listings in Social Security's listing of impairments. So when you're providing your functional descriptions for those 4 areas, again, address all 4 areas. We recommend, 1 to 2 good paragraphs of information for each area of mental functioning. Provide context for the applicant's functional limitations. And you can discuss their functional limitations. First and foremost, you want to try to discuss their functional limitations in the workplace context. But if they haven't worked in a long time or they've never worked, you can provide examples of their functional limitations in other areas of their life, at home, in their treatment, in the community, with you as their caseworker, how they struggle to function in their relationships with family, friends, etc. So it's difficult to document, functional limitations in a workplace setting when a person hasn't worked in 15 years or has never worked, but you can provide functional descriptions in other areas of their life. You can use quotes from the applicant and examples they provide you. And just a reminder that the functional information is 50% of the disability criteria. It's paragraph B of the mental health disorder listings. So it's important to be as detailed as you can. So here we provide kind of a side-by-side ineffective functional description for Mike, the practice case applicant, and then a more effective functional description. So for the ineffective functional description for Mike, it's just simply saying Mike has a hard time concentrating, persisting, and maintaining pace. He doesn't like to be around people and speaks slowly. And so, while it does describe Mike's struggles with functioning, it doesn't go into much detail that would help DDS get a picture of how exactly he struggles. So if you look at the more effective functional description, due to the symptoms of his illness, I found that Mr. Burns could only concentrate on the task at hand for about 15 minutes. So you're kind of quantifying how long he can concentrate before either ending the meeting or needing a break. And that would potentially translate to the way he functioned in a workplace setting. After that, he would start to complain of having a headache and he would ask me to go away. This appears to be due to listening to internal voices. His thinking is often disorganized. He is easily confused and he makes inappropriate responses to questions. So you're speaking to the mental health symptoms that Mike is experiencing that directly relate to his functional limitations. So just a few examples of some more detail that you could provide to kind of elaborate on that initial, more ineffective functional description for Mike. So after the functional limitation section, we have the summary and contact information section. This can, much like the introduction, can be 1 paragraph. You can restate all of the applicant's disabling health conditions. You can provide a summary of the different sources that you use to write the MSR. And by that, I mean, you can say, this writer or I, Dan Coladonato, the SOAR representative, used the records from County General Hospital, any county jail, and XYZ Community Mental Health Center, along with interviews with Mr. Burns and his sister, to write this medical summary report, something of that nature. So you're telling DDS kind of the sources that you use to write the MSR, and that really can be the summary section in a nutshell. It doesn't have to be very long, but it is helpful to restate the applicant's disabling health conditions. Then you would, provide your name, your contact information. You'll sign it and date it. And then if you're able to get the medical summary report co-signed by the applicant's treatment provider, you will provide a place for them to enter their name, sign, and date as well. And then we have a list on this slide of what Social Security considers acceptable medical sources. So on our website, we have some sample medical summary reports for different mental health diagnoses. You're welcome to take a look at those. And I also just want to remind you that if you would like to send your SOAR TA Center liaison your first few MSRs for review, we'd be happy to review them and provide feedback. You just want to make sure that they're fully redacted. So you have to take out your client's name, social security number, date of birth from the top of the MSR, and also remove your client's name throughout the entire body of the MSR. But if you would like to take advantage of that, that's a service we provide. So feel free to do so. We're happy to review MSRs and provide feedback. So we want to acknowledge the fact that the MSR does take time. And also just the SOAR model in general is a time-intensive model to help people with SSI and SSDI applications, but it is worth the effort. And really the effectiveness of the SOAR model is the time it takes for you to develop the claims, to work with the applicant intensively to gather all the relevant information, and submit that to Social Security. Because as you've probably learned by taking the SOAR online course and also by attending today's review session, there's a lot that goes into processing SSI and SSDI applications. And it can be challenging to prove that individuals qualify for these benefits. And so that's really the aim of the SOAR model, is to really take that time to develop the claim, submit it on behalf of the applicant, serve as their representative, help collect their medical evidence to submit with the claim, and to write the MSR. So, putting forth the initial effort can lead to good outcomes for the applicants that you serve. And when we look at the data that's put into our online application tracking system, which Amanda's going to talk about in just a second, we do find that SOAR programs that submit MSRs with their SSI and SSDI applications have higher outcomes. More approvals is what I mean by that. All right. I have not been monitoring the Q&A. Did any questions come in about the MSR, Amanda, that I should answer verbally here?
No, we answered all the questions as they came in. Feel free to send them in as we wrap up. This is the last section of the presentation. So if you have any lingering questions, get them in the Q&A and we'll answer them for you. We're going to move on to application tracking now. So you did the work, you submitted an application. Why are we asking you to track outcomes? It's so that you can get recognition for the hard work you're putting into the applications. I actually had someone reach out to me about a month ago from one of the states I'm a liaison for, and they let me, I had never heard from this person before, and they weren't registered in OAT, so I assumed they were a brand new SOAR provider when they reached out. And when we got to talking, I found out they were actually doing like 10 applications a year for the past several years. But I never knew about it because they were tracking their outcomes within their agency, but they weren't tracking it on OAT. So I had no idea, and SAMHSA had no idea that this agency was providing SOAR services or the impact that they had been making in their community. So we really encourage you, we're asking you to please register an OAT and track your outcomes so we know about the work that you're doing. It'll boost your community and state's outcomes. You can also run reports once you track your outcomes to see like any trends with the applications that you're submitting. And when we show stronger outcomes in communities and states, it justifies funding for more SOAR initiative. So it's really important to track your outcomes. For a lot of agencies or grant opportunities that may be willing to support SOAR, it's hard to ask for that funding without showing that this is something that works. And the only way we can do that is by tracking our outcomes. So to help facilitate this and make it really easy for you, we have a database called the Online Application Tracking, OAT. It's a web-based program that allows caseworkers to keep track of their outcomes. It's totally free. It's easy to use. You can access it from any web browser, so you can use Chrome or Internet Explorer. It does not matter. There's nothing to download. It's just a website that you visit, log in, track your outcomes, log out. It's on a secure server that's supported by SAMHSA. It's a .gov website, and it's HIPAA compliant. So we're not going to ask for any personal identifying information about the applicants. So you don't need to worry about violating any HIPAA guidance. So we track a few different things. So we look at the outcomes for initial applications and appeals using the SOAR model. What we're looking at is approval rates on applications, how many days it takes to get a decision, and caseworkers' use of critical components. So those 5 critical components Desiree talked about earlier with the SOAR model. And we can also track optional information. So the applicant's housing status when they were applying for benefits, their employment status, and any Medicaid or other public benefit reimbursements that happened once the applicant was connected with Social Security disability benefits. So to register an OAT, you'll just need to provide your basic contact information. We then, once you submit the registration, we verify that you completed the SOAR online course. So only people that are SOAR trained can use the OAT program. And then we'll send you a confirmation that you do have an OAT account once we verify you completed the SOAR online course. When you're entering information about the applicant to track their the outcomes of their application, this is how you'll do it. You'll create an alphanumeric ID that only you will know. So it just goes in a pattern of 2 letters, 2 numbers, 2 letters, 4 numbers, and you'll write it down somewhere else so that you'll know which applicant is connected to each alphanumeric ID. But that's the only way you're identifying applicants in the program. This ensures that you're not using any of their identifiable information. As a caseworker, this is what the website will look like once you log in. You'll be able to see your approval rates, how many applications you've submitted. Another fun thing I like is you can look at the approval rates in the state that you're working in, and you can also look at the national approval rates. I like to do that just to see where I was at as far as my approval rates compared to other providers in my state and across the country. And the summary reports, these are really cool. So you can run a summary report for a designated time frame. For example, you could say, okay, what do my outcomes for 2024 look like? You can narrow the dates to January until today and run a report, and it'll spit this back out at you so you can see your approval rate on initial applications, reconsiderations, and appeals, and your average days to decision at each of those levels as well. You can also filter for age or veteran status or someone's living arrangement. You can play around with it and run lots of reports to see trends within your work. So we want you to register for OAT. We host every other month OAT orientations and walkthroughs. So that was a really quick glimpse into OAT. If you don't feel ready to use it just yet, attend our next orientation and we'll give a really in-depth walkthrough of how to register for OAT and use it. But now that we've completed the online course review session, what are your expectations? So we want you to get started on your first application. Before doing that, reach out to your colleagues. If you have a local lead, like I said earlier, you can go to the state directory on the SOARworks website and click on your state to find out who your state team lead is, who your TA center liaison is, or who your local leads are. Reach out to us. We are here to help you through the process and hold your hand as much as you need it as you get started on applications. We do not want you to feel alone. We know sometimes the role of a SOAR provider, you can feel kind of like an island because there's not a whole lot of people within an agency that do this type of work, but we don't want you to feel that way. You always have support at the TA center. Reach out to your SSA and DDS representatives to introduce yourself. Let them know that you're going to be submitting SOAR-assisted applications and ask if they have any preferences for how you submit those applications. Find out about SOAR steering committees within your state or community, and track your outcomes and out so that you can get credit for the work that you do. All right, that brings us to the end of our presentation. Are there any final questions before we close it out? So Debbie asked, is the DDS representative usually the same? So I'm not able to see where everyone is who is logged into this review session. So some states have designated DDS representatives that are trained to do reviews on SOAR applications. So all SOAR applications within the state will always get sent to the same DDS office or same DDS examiner. Other states do not have that. So applications get sent to just the DDS examiner that's assigned to the claim. This is why you want to reach out to your TA center liaison or your state team lead to find out if there are specific SOAR contacts within DDS and SSA in your state. So for example, Michigan, every field office in Michigan for Social Security has a designated SOAR contact. So if someone from Michigan took the training and they reached out to me, the first thing I would say is, let's look what office you're going to be submitting applications to. Reach out to that SSA SOAR liaison to introduce yourself and let them know you're going to start submitting applications, just so that you can start building that relationship prior to when applications are submitted. Okay, so there haven't been any other questions that have come in. As always, reach out to your SOAR TA center liaisons if anything pops up for you. Like Dan said, we are more than happy to review medical summary reports before you submit them. Send them to us with a couple days, at least a couple of days notice, so that we have time to do a thorough review, and we'll send it back with a lot like guidance and suggestions for how you can improve your report or topics that you might want to expand upon in your reports. We want you to feel supported and have success right from the start. So thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. We're ending about 10 minutes early. Hopefully we'll see you next month on Soaring Over Lunch and for our OAT orientation in January.
Bye,
Have a
everyone.
great day. Bye.
Everyone.